Hello, hello, hello. New episode of our favorite series, ABCDS,
Yes,
Advanced Business Communications for Data Storytellers. We have a new style of episode today, which will be a little bit different from just obsessing and focusing on some of these singular books that we like and expand it to multiple books that we love. And before we dive in, we started a short conversation with Dave that we actually wanted to capture, which was around the progress of learning and the application of these concepts. So as we are immersing ourselves in these themes and we zoom in on the principles of persuasion and understand better what's actually going on in the hearts and minds when you're presenting ideas, and we start to map out these techniques, both Dave and I found ourselves actually engaging with these tactics in our day-to-day life. And I was just mentioning to Dave that the whole idea about the model update, which again, you told me about that before, you mentioned that, but as we leaned into it, it really connected some dots. And now I observe many situations with that kind of lens of, okay, I actually understand that someone had a model here and I see it real time being updated and really influence how I approach a bunch of these scenarios. And already made me more strategic about it. Now, Dave, what are your experiences?
So, the thing that I was noticing in my own sort of behavior change was because I've been refreshing this and because it's been extra sharp, my asynchronous or my independent persuasion has been excellent. I feel like I'm at the top of my game, right? So what do I mean by independent persuasion? I'm persuading myself and I'm doing a great job. No, what I mean is I have time to prep, right? So there's the meme of Batman with prep time is an unstoppable force, right? So when I'm doing an email, which means I can write it, read it, iterate it, try again, iterate it, try again, right? Those feel like I'm writing some of the best emails I've ever written professionally. When I'm preparing for a meeting, I've got a meeting coming up next week and I'm going to have time to prep. So I'm going to be able to walk through, okay, I'm about to try to update this person's model with a completely new capability. So the questions of what are you going to do differently now that you know this? How are you going to manage your team differently? How are you going to manage your P&L differently? I'm ready because I'm priming my own pump. I'm priming my content to force me to say these things in the meeting. So you're like, oh, hoorah, Dave's got it. Okay, now here's where the humility comes in. My ad hoc, off the cuff, spontaneous communication and persuasion has been not as good, to put it mildly. And I'm doing post-mortems on the meetings and I'm just slapping myself in the head because I'm you idiot, you walked right into the jaws of the crocodile on that one. I just had a meeting yesterday and I was not happy with how it went. It's okay, I'm going in, I'm okay, I've got a very clear set of questions. I even set an agenda ahead of time. I thought we were all on step 6 of an 8-step process. And this person's hold on a second. That wasn't literally who are you? Why are you here? How did you get in my office? What do you mean a model? What is a model? And I'm
how can I ignore you without consequence?
Right. Oh, okay. I guess we're going back to step 1. That's okay. I'm happy to take you on that journey again. But, my real-time ability to kind of get us back to that key decision, it just kept slipping off. And as I'm going back over, and I even confided in a colleague, I was man, I was really taken aback by that. They're yeah, man, you messed up. I was oh. Well, yeah, I walked right into the jaws of the crocodile. I had my cold cognition, and I was a little bit transfixed on the topic. Walked right into the jaws of can I ignore you? Or you're agitating my equilibrium and I am trying, now I'm going to be high friction, right? Claff talks about how they start doing nitpicky things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I'm talking about a model and they're oh, tell me all the features. This feature is relevant. Oh, what does it do? Tell me more about this. It's well, like we talked about. I already told you about this like months ago. Like why are we relitigating this feature? Why it's in the model, right? But they got wrapped around the axle on a feature which is like so far down the priority list. Like I need it to be up here, man. Like I got to know that you're ready to implement this from an operations point of view, not relitigate whether a feature should be in there or not. So it was like a text. Like if Claff was it, he would have been like, "Hey, buddy, you gotta more prep or get more agile." Maybe I just came like running full steam and I couldn't change direction in time. So, or here we go. Our frames collided, and mine lost.
It might be, but what I'm thinking is that you've been presented by an analyst frame, not in the traditional sense of when you're pitching a $1 million deal, and then the bankers will ask, okay, but what are the finances? How much are you paying yourself? What is the profit projection? Right, but it's that version in your world when you've been kind of sucked into this granular discussion. And what actually Claff recommends in that case is just to be prepared to always like suck the air out of those with addressing it concisely, directly, head on, and saying that we can cover it towards the end if you have more questions about it. And usually there are none at the end, right? So that kind of, but again, I know exactly because what you just said, I had my experiences with it. In fact, I think I just became more sensitive to lack of engagement when I experience it. When I see it. Before I might have brushed it off, but we had a situation when working on like a bigger project with one of our members, and an external stakeholder who was crucial to move things along was pulled into the meeting. And I think before I would have been satisfied with the level of engagement that I observed, but this time it just kept bothering me. And interestingly enough, only in retrospect could I identify that okay, what was missing was actually me being more proactive and more bullish with pulling in that stakeholder with questions. And then in other touch points, I just find myself just more comfortable with throwing out open-ended questions all the time. Again, this is something that I knew already. It's not my first rodeo, but just us going through these and even with the model update frame, I'm like, no, for the model to update, I need to present an open-ended question. It's not going to happen otherwise, basically. I'm simplifying it, but
right. No. And, speaking of engagement, like being asked questions feels like engagement, but you're getting engaged with the wrong part of their brain.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
If she wants to go deep in the model, I think a year ago I would have been like, oh goody, like they're so interested in what my team made. Now I'm just like, oh shit, like we're getting wrapped around the axle on something that's frankly irrelevant. Like we got to move on to the key decisions. But. Yeah,
and then always being prepared with the type of open-ended questions that you can deploy in these situations. And so this is the other thing. I talked about this multiple times, but there are the 4 stages of learning, right? And the first is the unconscious incompetence. You don't even know what you don't know. There are these invisible walls that you keep bumping into. It's frustrating. Reality in general does not respond as you expected or wanted to. And then there's the second stage, which is the conscious incompetence. So the information has been presented to you. You are persuaded by the learning itself, right? But you're still incompetent. You still don't own the skill.
Yeah,
and this
you know what good looks like, but you're not physically capable of generating good yet.
Exactly. And then might I add that the modern education system, but that again, going down into that rabbit hole, usually holds your hand all the way up to this point of, okay, now we made you, consciously incompetent. Here's a degree.
Good luck.
Good luck. And then comes the third stage of the 4 stages, which is becoming consciously competent. So now you kind of put it into action. You kind of have a few tools to apply and deploy in situations if you remember to apply them. And when you do that, it still often is clunky, rough on the edges. It's very labor intensive too. So it's difficult to do. It's exhausting, but with the right kind of application and feedback, ultimately you can reach the holy grail, which is probably, you guessed it, unconscious competence.
Right.
It's just
low effort,
now
high yield. Yeah.
Exactly. The skills are deployed in these situations independent of your conscious control. Right now, it's a competence. And that's what we're driving towards. So even with this course, that's our goal, to lay out the landscape, reveal these truths about business engagement and stakeholder engagement, and then get the audience to apply them situation by situation, scenario to scenario, for ultimately for it to become a skill. So on that cheerful note, Dave, what are we going to cover today?
So today's our grab bag. So what we were talking about how we wanted to kind of structure this series, right? And so we had those first few episodes, which were really about, okay, let's go deep into several critical works, right? So we had Cialdini as the foundation. We had Voss as like the super actionable book. We had Claff as the, high stakes single conversation. You get introduced like these contextual things like frame collisions and the croc brain. So you get into this like neuroscience in a very like visceral and evocative way, even if like the science is wrong, like the model is good enough that it helps you process these problems. And then we kind of rounded it out with McCraney, which talks about cognitive biases, but also persuasion as learning, which I thought kind of sucks a lot of that prior stuff together into a new way to think about what we're doing, right? It completely gets rid of the adversarial nature of persuasion and it turns it into like more of a teaching thing, which I think has a natural affinity and resonance for data science professionals. But there's also the caution of you can't really teach through facts. You have to kind of invite them, make space for them to update their model so that they can then learn. And then once they learn, it's stuck. Like that's not going anywhere, right? And so we are in this kind of like interlude, right? This is like the intermission before we get into the synthesis, where we start saying, okay, so we got this great backbone of academic knowledge. Let's bring it into the corporate settings and let's talk about how to actually do this stuff as a data science professional. But before we do that, there's like this small cohort of works by 3 different authors that we'll talk about that you can't get to synthesis without a quick stop here. And so we're going to talk about 3 authors. Paulos, I can't think of his first name off the top of my head, but his book is Innumeracy. Innumeracy is the problem. Or I shouldn't say the problem. It is a problem. It is a big problem. Okay. Then we're going to talk about Jocko Willink and extreme ownership and how that is the strategy to attack the problem. And then you're like, okay, great. So there's a problem. It is my problem. I need to fix it. Nope, spoiler. I just spoiled the Jocko thing for you. Ownership kind of self spoils. So how do I do it, guys? Oh, well, let's talk about Edward Tufte and like his entire corpus. We're going to go over that briefly. We're going to do a severe injustice. So this is another one of those things where like go to his seminar, buy his books, watch his videos. The man is like transcendent as far as like his mastery of this domain. But I'll give you like, we'll talk through some of the easy stuff that again, it's like Voss, or it's like, okay, like within 24 hours, you will have leveled up your communication in the quantitative domain, at least. So this, when it smushes together into like a smoothie, we're going to end up with that critical inflection point that sets up synthesis.
I love it. And I never thought that this is the first time I think I will have like a proper episode where a significant portion will be dedicated to one of my favorite books from Jocko Willink. And I did not think that this would be the context, but I love it. So also with Innumeracy, full disclosure, I haven't read the book personally. We talked about it a lot. I'm intrigued enough, and I can't wait for you to actually show me exactly what's happening there. Why is that a huge problem? I'm all ears.
So you're going to want to take Innumeracy and make it like part of the like data storyteller curriculum, like almost like a requirement to read it to join the club. So and let me give an overview, right? So the fundamental thesis of Innumeracy is that people in general, data scientists included, are innumerate. Now, innumerate doesn't mean bad at math. If I said everyone was bad at math, I'd have data scientists burning me in effigy. Okay, but what is innumerate? Well, we all know what illiterate is. Illiterate is a person who cannot read. Innumerate is somebody who cannot basically work with numbers. And again, I can hear the data scientists cracking their teeth in anger over this, but let's contextualize some of the examples, and then we'll get into the thesis. So the thesis is that most people, when presented with numbers, quantitative data, whatever, their brains don't process it correctly. And if you're wondering, like, okay, what's a more approachable way to say this? Think about Mark Twain. There's lies, damnable lies, and statistics. Right? And so there are so many once you, this is like the that movie where the guy puts on the glasses and he sees like the alien faces, like it's like Among Us or them or something like that. Like you can't unsee this once you pull back the curtain. But like classic example, just to open up why this is a problem. There's probably on a daily basis there will be a news report that says something that you love triples your risk of cancer, right? So something that, whatever it is, right? Steak, pepperoni, smoking, eating food off the grill, wearing shoes, like what? Like they'll come up with the most bizarre things, right? But they're like triples your risk of cancer, 300% increase. Okay, well, let's look at that for a second. By itself, what's your reaction to me telling you, hey, eating grilled food increases your cancer risk by 300%?
But I will die soon because I will keep eating it, but I'm very sad about it, though.
Right. Terror. You are like your heart beats faster. You're like, oh my God, I can only microwave food forever and ever because I can no longer use my grill. Okay. That is innumeracy at work. Okay? Because if I told you, wait a minute, what's actually going to happen, and these are illustrative numbers, I don't want anybody quoting me like, I got from the NIHS. You go from 1 in a million to 3 in a million. That is a 300% increase. You have tripled your risk of cancer. Now, from an absolute risk point of view, 3 in a million is still incredibly unlikely. So are you going to alter the entire trajectory of your life? You're younger than I am. You've got plenty more years of grilling ahead of you, right? Are you willing to forego all of that grilling for to get back 2 in a million odds?
Well, surely not, especially after I know that it's only, like, in this context, probably I will grill even more.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You know what? I'm willing to go up to 5 in a million, so I'm having grilled breakfasts now. Yeah. So
just charred.
Right. Everything's well done, smoky. But that is like the microcosmic example, the smallest possible example of innumeracy. Okay, and that is something that business people fall into, your friends fall into it, and even data scientists can fall into it. Okay? And you're like, well, not me, I'm a data scientist. The 300% could still be statistically significant. Right? Like you can see things like hazard ratios of like 1.1. So what does that mean? Let's back up. For those that don't do epidemiology, a hazard ratio or relative risk ratio, these are very closely related categories. 1.1 means you're 10% more likely than the other group to have the thing. And as long as the significance interval doesn't cross 1.0, because that means they're equally likely, you generally get a statistically significant result. So if the confidence interval or the uncertainty interval, let's say, is between 1.05 and 1.17, with 110 being in the middle there, that is a statistically significant difference. Okay, and you can have studies that would show something like that, but then when you get to the practicality of it, you're like, okay, so we went from, 1 in a million to 1.1 in a million. Well, who cares? Again, these are contrived, but that's the point. So your tests, even though, like, okay, I went to school, I studied statistics, I understand significance, I could do it by hand with a blindfold, like, you're still not, you're missing the forest for the trees on this one, right? So that's the crux of innumeracy. So the crux of innumeracy is that when presented with figures, we need to really think about it, really contextualize it. Okay, ask the right questions about those figures, or ask the right questions to get the right figures. Right? The canonical example I use when I talk to people, I want to be a data scientist when I grow up. Great, here's what it's like to be a data scientist. Hey, Jan, who are our best customers? I'll see you Monday. If Jan doesn't immediately ask, wait, what do you mean by best? Jan is about to have a really rough next couple weeks. Right? that's not like, there were no numbers exchanged, but that's how you're about to get on that innumeracy treadmill, because you're pulling a metric that's not like grounded in reality, or it's not grounded to their expectations. So that's the intro to innumeracy. I've got a couple of examples ginned up to like really cement this, but like, what are your thoughts initially? You know, because you've got that beautiful perspective. You get to talk to data science leaders from across industries, and how often do you think it is really just people collectively are not good at processing quantitative info?
100%. And so from my experience, and this was rooted in CLAF a little bit, but also honestly instinctually as well, is that whenever you present, you need to avoid numbers as long as it's possible, right? So only at the very end, only while we cross all those critical barriers, including how cognition is in place, everyone's aligned conceptually, right? We're looking in the same direction. We are on the same page with the big picture. Only then, once we know what numbers are we going to talk about, why we're going to talk about them, the necessary commitments and investment is already in there. That's the only time when it's safe to talk about numbers. You open that box anytime before, you're done, right? That's just so, it's such a landmine. And even now that you're talking, it explains to me like a whole different layer of why this is true. I knew this to be true. Every single episode, I'm becoming more convinced if I wasn't already. But I see that this is like the core issue there. And it was very interesting now you giving me the data scientist perspective on this, because I would have said that, you know, though if you are in a room with data scientists, surely it's less of a problem. But no, I mean, as long as it's a Homo sapiens sapiens, it will remain to be a kind of like, I don't like to use that, but it's almost like a bug, you know, that's just there. I'm sure it has its evolutionary purpose.
Well, right. It's like McCraney's. McCraney's got 30 different bugs. Here's your 31st bug.
Yeah.
Our brains are not well suited to quantitative information. Even when you have all the training in the world, you still can make mistakes.
And that also, again, not to go down too much on the evolutionary psychology rabbit hole, but I mean, there are entire communities who don't have the concept of quantitative information. You know, there are tribes still alive out there where their conception is one, two, or many. That's how they can think about the world, right? They cannot even understand 4 legs of a table. And their environment is much more similar to our evolutionary journey, like 99.999% of it, than our modern environment, where, you know, numbers and stats and all that stuff is just part of your daily experience. So a lot of that pain that you're experiencing comes from that kind of disconnect and misalignment.
And it's also very abstract, right? Like, you know, okay, going back to the evolutionary basis, like we hunted, we avoided cold and wetness, and right, it's all physical, very tangible. You know, I know a lot of people that, you know, in the physics curriculum, the basic Newtonian motion was like, okay, right? The harder I push, the faster it goes. Okay, we're going to do electromagnetism. I have no idea how to even conceptualize this. It's an abstract. And so then the attendance goes down, the continuation in the program goes down. So, yes, I mean, so now you have this abstraction concept as well. And I love this point that you made. I want to double click on it for a second. Like, we got pretty damn far as a species without hardcore math. As much as, like, I love math, I study math, I have a master's in math, like, and I enjoy reading it even recreationally, or like getting into the fundamentals of it. Like, I have like Kolmogorov's book on probability and stuff. Like, I do enjoy it, but like, they weren't doing calculus in Rome, and they built those like giant, you know, temples and stuff. They were able to do military expeditions, and, you know, just as an example, not to turn this into like a Rome podcast all of a sudden.
We can if you want.
Like all male bonding leads to Roman history. But like,
let me pull up some slides.
Yes, it is like super novel compared to what we are, and so like just to segue into a couple of examples, right? So here's a great, like, you know, you look at you're at the board meeting, you're at the meeting, right? And market share increased from 10% to 15%. That's fantastic. Okay. Now let's unpack that one, because again, there's some innumeracy here, or the risk of innumeracy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So first of all, going from 10% to 15%, that is like a literal, like we were here, then we went there. Okay. But I could have said our market share grew by 50%. That is a math in the like the grammar of math. That is a grammatically correct mathematical statement. But when we're talking about percentages, and I say our market share grew by 50%, you know that somewhere that croc brain's like, we went from 10 to 60. Like you have to feel that, like that visceral, like it's too good to be true. So like you're gonna stomp it down. You're gonna rein in your own crocodile. But that like they're percentages, and like I always tell people, like if you're gonna talk about percentages, generally the bias should be additive, not multiplicative. Right. So if I say 10 to 15, I'm going to say 5%. We increased it by 5%, because I think that's the easiest way to conceptualize this. Because going from like 1% to 2%, we improved it by 1%. Right. Yes, you doubled, but again, like be careful about multiplicative on things that are already ratios. Right. Because the percentage is a ratio at the end of the day. So that's one thing. So 10 to 15. So you could have started that conversation. We increased it by 5%. Now, hopefully they're not thinking, okay, so it's 10.5, right? No, additively, we went from 10 to 15. But then that's like level 1 thinking about innumeracy. Level 2 thinking about innumeracy, and this is where the data scientists can get caught too. Did the market share improve because we got better? Did the market share improve because our competitors got worse, exited, consolidated? There's a consolidation play. Something happened where there was a movement. But so the number by itself doesn't tell a story. So you have to have the narrative around it. So you can get very excited. Oh, we went from 10% to 15%. Okay. Did we get better? Did we sell more? Did our people get more productive? Did we build a better mousetrap? Or is the market shrinking and we're shrinking slower than the rest of them? That's still kind of a good news story. Or is the market shrinking and our competitors are already running for the exit, and we're going to be caught holding a bag, right? Think of like subprime mortgages in that, like the scene. I don't think you've seen Margin Call. You got to go see Margin Call. But there's like this fire sale scene where they're trying to sell debt. They're like 98 cents on the dollar, 90 cents, 70 cents, 30 cents on the dollar, right? They're just trying to get it out there, right? Because whoever's the last one holding the bag is going to have worthless debt on their books, right? So, our market share grew. Or hey, boss, I just bought $30 million at 30 cents on the dollar. $30 million of debt on 30 cents on the dollar. Like, okay, well, you're an idiot. Like, there's got to be something wrong with that debt asset instrument. So that example, all right, market share 10 to 15%. Now your data scientists might have found it, right? Now you could argue, why are they doing that basic SQL-esque analysis? Maybe there's like intense market research and you needed really good quantitative researchers. But then if they're not answering the questions of like why, then the company could be heading down the primrose path. We went from 10 to 15. Great. Double whatever we did this year, just double it. Meanwhile, you're actually like, you've got a better seat on a car that's about to go off a cliff. So that's it's one of the examples in the book about how you can commit those innumeracy fallacies. And then there's a bunch of other ones, like the gambler's fallacy, right? So if I told you it's a fair coin and I got 2 heads in a row, you're like, oh, surely the next one must be tails, because now we're in this, it's a 1 in 8 chance of getting 3 heads in a row. So that must mean it's a 7/8 chance of not having a head. But it's like, no, that's not how it works. You're imposing dependence on independent phenomena, right? So you have things like gambler's fallacy. You have things like over-reliance on the mean, when which is average, which is afflicted by things with high leverage, right? Like if you, me, and Bill Gates were hanging out, the average net worth of that group is in the billions. Where's your Bentley? Like, I don't have a Bentley, right? So like that's where the mean is misleading. If it's the median, then okay, fine. We find the median. Median is robust to outliers. And so even just having like a simple conversation where someone's like, oh, I calculated the mean. Did anyone check for outliers? Do we know what the influence of an outlier might be? And just to like shine a light on my own stupidity, I have a bias to favor median. I'm working with one of my data scientists, and we're trying to like separate these cohorts. And they were using the mean of this key output, which was something related to days. And I said, I really want to see the medians. I want to see a median separation because there's going to be some outliers. They're going to pull the numbers up. So you're going to have like you're going to have imposters in the cohorts. And then this person looked at me and said, that's mathematically impossible to have separation of the medians because this metric, which is another metric that you asked me to separate them on, completely contradicts the median. Like you can't have both. So that was like my own short-sighted enumeration. I'm about to torture this poor person, like, slice and dice the data until you get median separation because medians are better than means. That's my rule of thumb. And then this person was like, well, hold on a second, Skippy. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too, basically. The mathematical equivalent of you can't have your cake and eat it too. So here I am, again, data science executive, master's in the field, and I still can stumble when I'm thinking about what a concert of metrics might mean. So like in a one metric situation, maybe the median is correct. But when you've got, you're trying to use 3 metrics to define your cohorts, these two can't exist. They can't coexist. You can only control one at a time. And I was trying to control both. So it's just kind of an interesting reminder that we can be enumerate sometimes ourselves. So I'll let you kind of react and comment, but this is the problem. The problem is people either forget to include factors, they misinterpret factors, or results or numbers, or they don't ask the right questions to contextualize the numbers. That's a numeracy in a nutshell.
This is fascinating to me, just listening, and my brain is going crazy with connecting dots because we hear a lot of times that we want to become the analytics translators. It needs to be translated. And as you lay out this case, so I started to think about this language barrier. Now, language barrier in the sense that when you're trying to put these numbers into words, what you're trying to convey is the meaning of the numbers. Which, by the way, when you're trying to convey meaning, that's the very function of language.
Right.
If you think about how it evolved, it's a tool. Language was a tool which was used to convey meaning. That's why the language was used first for stories, right? Like what happened. That conveys how can we interpret the situation? What does it mean for us, for our tribe, for the future? It's a very specific type of thing. Then you have math. And math in and of itself, those numbers don't have meaning. It's abstract, right? Don't have meaning in the sense that a number in and of itself, without a person attached to it, without an event, without consequences, does not have. So the linguistic dimension of math is not the same as the everyday language that we use. Plus, with language, if a translation needs to take place, because that's what needs to take place. You need to translate the number into meaning, and that's where everything can go wrong because there's a mistranslation. But every translation ever is an interpretation. Let me specify why. So let's look at the Greek word logos. It's been used a lot, since Aristotle, and the word logos can mean a bunch of different things in English. It can mean logic, it can mean word, it can mean argument. So when you're translating that word into English, you need to assert your interpretation. You cannot translate it without interpretation. So whenever you do that with numbers, you do the same. You're interpreting what the number means. And innumeracy causes the wrong interpretive language, right? So that's very interesting, because if you are a data scientist, you might be subject to innumeracy, but at the same time, like, you do live and breathe numbers every day. You probably have better mathematical education than your stakeholders. So you are in a different world. You are speaking a different language in that sense. So for me, that's almost like the main takeaway here. Just like the gravity of the problem is actually more fundamental than I would have assumed. It's like, people don't really understand numbers. It's too fast. We don't want to, the brain doesn't want to work that hard. Yes, but also I think it's probably just goes way deeper, that kind of disconnect. What are your thoughts around that? I don't want to get too philosophical.
No, because there's two. So this segues perfectly into the ownership part. So, but you're the way that you're moving us into like a language area, I think helps to bridge the gap that I created when I said even data scientists can be enumerate, because it's like we're not, right? And I'm talking about the innumeracy is really at like level 2 and beyond, which is the contextualization, the interpretation, the story on the numbers. And so by you bringing us into the language domain, there is tools to describe this. It's localization, right? Think of like, I don't know if you've ever played old video games. They come from Japan, and they're doing like literal translations to English, and you get really weird sentences, like the famous "You spoony bard" from Final Fantasy IV, when Tella yells at Edward, right? Like, what is spoony? But there was some sort of phrase in Japanese that probably worked in that context, but they failed to localize it to America. So we're just kind of like, okay, spoony, that must be like some old-timey word for being a weirdo or something. But so now I'm thinking that the gap is localization, which is incumbent upon the translator. And as the storyteller, we are the translator, which is how I can tie this into ownership. So what we want to do is, very briefly, again, this is a very light read. It's not difficult at all. It's a little gloomy, in my opinion, because it's like everybody sucks at math and the world is doomed as a result. It's like, well, we got pretty far without it. It's important. It's different now. Like the whole model has updated, right? We need it, right? But you're in a world where you get a lot. Oh, I could never do math. I was bad at math. I hate math. Math is too hard. I'll leave that for you smart people. So there's like an aversion to the math, and then that's, let's say you get past that, because generally once you get to a sufficiently high level in the organization, people stop talking like that, right? And now it becomes a localization problem. And if you're failing to cross the gap with localization, it's on you. And that's where the ownership thing comes from, because what the temptation is, they don't understand me. They don't understand my work. They can't appreciate my brilliance. It's like I'm casting pearls before swine. Like that's like the victim mindset of the like struggling genius who's surrounded by plebs who can't even, add 3 numbers together in their head. And it's like, oh man, if only all of you guys were smart like me, like, man, this company would take over the whole world. I'm painting with a broad brush. I'm taking some liberties here, but like, I hear that sentiment. I even feel the temptation to utter that sentiment from time to time, which is why you can't go from innumeracy to Tufty without a quick stop with our friend Jocko. So again, I'm doing a slight disservice to the book. This book's fantastic, but ownership, if you take nothing else from it, just, okay, if I'm not happy with the outcomes, it's my fault. And so how can I discover my locus of control, right? And he uses great examples. Like, I had a mission and we missed the recon point by 30 minutes. Okay, well, it was the weather, dude. Like, I can't control the weather. That's the victim mindset. And then he uses the example, okay, well, you could have planned better. You could have had a contingency plan for rain, or you could have, look at the forecast. Oh, I have to shift my timeline up by 30 minutes to buffer for the rain or things of that nature. Oh, it's my team's not doing what they're supposed to. Well, it's your fault, right? Like, you're not conveying it to them. Even like, he has this beautiful framework for how to give feedback, and 3/4 of it is like, how am I not doing this correctly? Even if that person is genuinely screwing up, right? Like, I need you to color this green, and it comes back blue. I don't say, well, Laz, do you not understand the difference between green and blue? It's like, Laz, how can I better convey that I need it to be green? Again, this is a contrived example, but like, that's his mindset. What am I doing wrong? Okay. And I know we're going to bro out over this book because we both love it, but like, that's the key, like, fulcrum or inflection point between diagnosing the problem, which is innumeracy is widespread, and then how do you remediate that? Well, you have to understand that if your audience doesn't understand what you create, if the action gap that we talked about in the intro of the whole series persists, you're not building the bridge to get them over the gap. We create the action gap because operations are going to operate. Right, the salespeople are going to sell, the marketers are going to market, the finance people are going to do their finance things. We are, generally speaking, coming at a lot of these domains orthogonally. Here's my like 3-dimension right hand finger thing, right? To either alter their trajectory or to accelerate their trajectory, but we don't create the trajectory usually. So, in the absence of a data science department, they're going to do their thing. So if there's an action gap, like, hey, you guys should zig instead of zag. No, it's your fault for not sufficiently compelling them to zig. It's not their fault for not listening to you and zigging. So pull the ownership onto yourself and then figure out how you could do a better job of conveying it. So that's like the whole book in 3 cents. Please go get the book. That was a fantastic book. But wait, I mean, you read this one. I know you like this one. Let's bro out for a bit before we get into Tufty.
So I love that book for many reasons. So first of all, I spent some time in the military, so it hit home immediately. Plus, when I read the book, it was the perfect time. We were building a previous company, Data Leaders, which we sold in 2020. And when you're growing a company, things go wrong. It's just part of the process, right? And your instinct is always to find why things went wrong, and your self-preservation and your ego, which is always at play, we talked about that, always wants to point the finger, but in the wrong direction, right? When you're pointing the finger, you should be pointing the thumb, right? And here's like a big thing. What really connected it to for me, and whether whoever's listening to this is a leader or a contributor on the team, was that when Jocko made the case of that being an organizational culture, when you have that extreme ownership, whenever something goes wrong, it is your fault. But there's no but. Something went wrong. It was your fault. Find out why. When that becomes the operating system in a team, suddenly people start to take responsibility. It sucks a lot of resentment out of the day-to-day interactions. Everyone appreciates people taking responsibility. Even if, especially so, if at the end of the day, the weather was actually not ideal, right? But when that person starts to weave and convey a narrative in which they are at fault for not anticipating that and shift the focus to how can I avoid that in the future, suddenly everyone looks in the right direction. Or everyone will start clashing. Everyone is kind of retracting into, but this person, this is why it happened, and things just don't get done. That was the main thing for me. If you want to get things done, you cannot do it without extreme ownership, because there will always be an external factor that you can point to. Always, right? And that kind of victim mentality is the opposite of empowerment. Funnily enough, because again, it's counterintuitive. It's like, hey, I'm starting to like blame myself. Is that supposed to be empowering? Right? That's not what it's about. It's not like they're blaming yourself, right? But finding out how could you have done better. and without acknowledging that at the end of the day, it was your fault at some point, you were the bottleneck, and look, circumstances might not have resulted in you actually taking that action. Now you can take it in the future. But if you don't even acknowledge it, you don't even have a chance to improve, right? So these are like also people might say that, oh, duh, but not really, because most organizations, vast majority, and most individuals do not have that mindset. And look, let me point the thumb here too, that something I know, something, I read that book multiple times, I wrote out on it with, many people, including my business partners, and we still catch ourselves saying that, hey, I'm not taking ownership here. So with that, a lot of people say, and we talked about this, but now we can maybe touch on it again, is that, they don't understand because they are data illiterate. That's the problem. The organization is data illiterate. And I've been to many conferences where, they invited us, and I've listened to a bunch of these panel discussions. And I know that the group therapy can often go into just kind of getting things off their shoulders, saying that, yeah, and then
favorite word for it.
It's very real. It's very real, and then that's okay. By the way, like that's okay to just kind of share frustrations and all that. But when the punchline becomes that, okay, so they are at fault, and how can we now achieve this data literate utopia? I think they do a disservice to themselves, because the right way to look at it is, how can we fix that gap, and how can I take the most responsibility in that? Because otherwise I just expect someone to do something, and it will be, first of all, just from a practical perspective, way more difficult, but you also usually you start to miss the forest for the trees, and you're not being able to see clearly the truth of it. So even in this case, now that we built up the innumeracy case, I think this would be the perfect example where you would fall into that pitfall, and with dire consequences. So right. I think Jocko's book, again, if you're listening to this, first of all, it's an entertaining read. It's a really good book. And once you read the book, by the end, you will have internalized that concept. Now I actually want to read it again, because whenever I read it, I find myself just being a way better business partner, like a way better spouse, right? Just a way more pleasant human being to interact with, and I become way more productive. And again, people might say, "Oh, how are you becoming more productive when you're burdening yourself with all these, fake accusations at yourself?" But that's not the point. It's quite the opposite.
No, it's not a burden at all. It's empowerment. I mean, what a great message! And like, think about, and I apologize because this will be a slightly political tangent, but like,
please.
So much energy is devoted to teaching people how to not even they discover the victim narrative, right? And I understand demographically. Oh, look at this guy talking about such things. Fine, whatever.
How dare you, Dave?
Yeah, but like, I've sat in the trainings. The trainings are like so aggressively trying to teach people to be like, oh, like, did you realize that you were just victimized just now? No, I didn't know I was victimized. Now I'm a victim. Like, instead, Jocko's like, all right, like, it is what it is. So how are you going to fix it? Like, there's a wall there. Okay, you can bitch about the wall, or you can knock it down, scale it, go under it, go around it. But like, either you complain that the wall is there. We will all agree with you. Yeah, man, the wall is there. Like, that sucks, dude. There's a wall right there. Like, someone built that wall, dude. Like, oh, man. But you haven't gotten to the destination. And no amount of complaining about the wall gets you to the destination. And so if you start to teach people, like, okay, well, you need to think about how you're going to get to the destination. And that mindset of like, okay, where is the control here? Because, it's the weather, it's my socioeconomic status, it's my education, I picked the wrong major, whatever. Like a whole litany of reasons. Instead of like talking, there's a psychological thing. It's like a filter. It's the same concept behind like The Secret, where it's like you can manifest things by thinking about them. But it's quite like your brain actually filters based on what you think about. So if all you talk about is the reasons why you can't, you will continue to train your brain to find those. It's like if you're car shopping, I'm looking for an Infiniti, and all of a sudden you're hyper aware of all the Infinitis around you. It's that feel. I can't remember the name of it. Someone chat GPT that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't think I will be able to recall, but I get the concept.
Yeah. So like now you're trying to train your brain. Okay, where was the place for me to zig instead of zag? What a great message! Like you said, I read the book. I'm a better spouse. I'm a better you're a parent, better leader of my organization, better partner at work. I'm more likely to pick up the IC work that I as a CEO didn't think I thought it was below me, but it's wait a minute, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? Like if I'm not going to do it, who's going to do it? Like that mindset, right? So what a great message in general, and that's why everybody should read this because it's a great message to help harden yourself against the invitation to sort of lay down and lounge in the victim narrative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And just in case, if someone is, getting triggered by this on the political level, like I'm a double immigrant, meaning that I migrated twice. So I moved from Hungary to London and then from London to Canada. Obviously, the second one, I was in a little bit of a better position. But originally, when I moved to London from Hungary, I had like $500 in my pocket and in tens of thousands of dollars of debt at the same time, right? And I didn't know anyone. And it was the most empowering thing ever, because like if I wanted to make it happen, I had no recourse at all. So if I did not take that responsibility and pointed a thumb instead of the finger, well, okay, what am I going to do then? And just a note on that the U.S. as well, the whole idea that you're a nation of immigrants, I think that's still like that kind of mindset behind the American industriousness. That's where it comes from. It's so productive because people did take responsibility of building a nation. So anyways, probably that's the most political we're going to get, but yes. 100%. It's
we're going
like,
to snip it there before it gets too political.
Exactly. But that's a great segue into, okay, how are we going to take responsibility then for Innumeracy?
Yep. So let's rehash, right? So Innumeracy, that's the wall, right? So we talked about the action gap. Okay, now we've got an interesting thesis about the root of the action gap, which is Innumeracy. Generally, like it's a localization problem, right? So we're translating our data science into something for the business to do. They're not taking the bait. They're not doing the thing, and so the warm embrace of ego preservation is to blame them for being enumerate. But because we know Innumeracy is a thing, now that we can diagnose it, okay, let's take ownership of the treatment. That's Jocko's contribution. And so now, okay, how do we get better at conveying this stuff? And that is where Tufty comes in. Cue the Stone Cold Steve Austin glass break intro music, right? Because this guy, if you've ever seen him live, like he is absolutely incredible. Like this is the culmination of about maybe 40 years of studying one problem to its absolute breaking point, which is how do you convey information, right? And you'll hear stuff or read stuff when he's going, right? Like for example, you can read something like 60 times faster than I can speak. Mm-hmm. So if you think about what we're doing, this is just like a slight tangent, right? Everybody wants to make a YouTube video. Nobody wants to write an article. Okay? It's like I constantly see this with like content creators that want to make videos to talk about something instead of just write an article. It might only be like 600 words. It's not like the biggest article ever, but like you could probably get more done in a 600-word blog post, which is one piece of Microsoft Word printed. About 700 words is the limit, I think. You can convey everything there, or you need a 30-minute video, right? Now, it might take you a lot more than 30 minutes to write it, but if you're just trying to convey information, the written word is so much more efficient than the spoken word. And he points this out, right? Now, you can like I can't read a one-page paper and drive, but I can listen to a podcast while I'm driving. So there's like benefits to the different forms of media. But like he's the one that introduced that, as far as I know, right? Mm-hmm. And he's got so many of these concepts. I mean, he loves to talk about the Amazon meeting. And you've probably heard of this, right? They gather everyone together, and they have like a one pager or a 2-pager, and then they sit for 10 minutes to make sure that everybody read it, and then they discuss it. And their meetings are supposedly like
so
hyper
powerful.
efficient. Yeah, and it's like, okay. So one of the things that Tufte laments is corporate America is so married to PowerPoint decks. And he's like, PowerPoint decks have to be the worst way to communicate. And so here's one of the concepts that he introduces, which is to like expand horizontally instead of build vertically. So that's very abstract. So this is what I mean. A PowerPoint deck is vertical. You can only consume one tidbit of information at a time. Go forward a slide, go backward a slide, go forward 2 slides, go backwards a slide. Right? You're right. It's the visual equivalent of like a phone menu. Right? You call in, they're like, press 1 for accounting, press 2 for HR. Like, you're stuck, right? You don't know if that you actually want like 7 for whatever, accounts receivable or something like that. You have to wait, right? And nobody likes robo phone menus because it's the ultimate in like linear vertical information. Press 0 to repeat this. It's like, oh God, now I got to cycle all the way back through it because I zoned out around 5 and 6. PowerPoint decks are the equivalent of that, right? Because what do you do in a PowerPoint deck? And by the way, like I have a very strong point of view, and Tufte even has a point of view on like what is a good PowerPoint deck. But we're kind of making the most of like one of the worst means of communication. But people treat those like they're dollar bills. In corporate America, oh, you got a deck? Like, let me see your deck. Oh, it's a great deck, man. You know, it's like that scene in American Psycho. Like, let's see Paul Allen's card, right? It's like, let's see Dave Coughlin's deck. Oh, wow, nice use of color and graphics and stuff. Yeah, such a tasteful watermark. So, like, that's like the cult of the deck, and like the McKinseys and stuff exacerbate that. I remember, and now, you know. And I went through the consulting thing for a few years, and so now when I get slides, the first thing I'm judging the person, like, your slides are terrible. Instead of like, okay, what are you trying to say to me? I'm like, oh, these aren't aligned. These graphics aren't aligned. I can't even look at it. Like, it's such a trivial thing. So the linearity of the thing. So the written word, going back to the written word, like I could give you like a 2-page Microsoft Word report analysis, very clearly written. It will contain so much information density, and it will take you 20 minutes to read it, and you'll get all the stuff, right? And you could even, reread. But again, like it's 1 page, like 1 page of Word. So open up Microsoft Word, type out a page, like do a data science project, and write a report about it. Like think about if you've ever read a white paper, like medical ones, for example, they're all over like the I can't think of the national.
Yeah, and I know the
NIH maybe, a National Institute of Health, something like that. They're open to the public, so you can read it. So like if you printed them out and they're written in that column, so you have even more information density. But like turn that into slides. You have like a 60-slide deck, and it would take you an eternity to click through all that stuff. But you can read the whole thing very quickly. So instead of going from data science to deck, try writing a report. Just like, even if you can't use it culturally, just appreciate the density. And now let's take that concept of density and apply it to PowerPoint, because again, we're sort of trapped with PowerPoint, right? So there's this like concept of ink is expensive. Pretend the ink is expensive. So you want to make sure that any drop of ink is purposeful, right? So he's very good. He has this thing called like chart junk. All right. So I'm going to continue to pick on Microsoft. If you go in Excel, right, and you create a graph, like a bar chart, it's going to default with like labels, axes, all like a heading, a legend, all this stuff. And it's like, you don't need all of that. So like delete that, delete that, delete that, delete. So just convey, okay, I have 2 rectangles. one's bigger than the other. I can put the label inside the rectangle, so now I don't need a legend. Oh, and let me orient the whole thing 90 degrees because my eye reads right to left. So instead of doing vertical comparison, I'll do a horizontal comparison, right? Let me desaturate the color palette because I don't need these big angry blood red bars. I could do it with like gray on a white background, right? And all of a sudden, like, oh, I get it. Like the Q4 sales were higher than the Q1 sales. And it's just it's like it's almost like drinking a fresh glass of water. Like, but that it's in the slide. And what I'm doing is I can't be so dense in a slide like Microsoft Word, but I could be clear, right? And if anything, you almost want like anti-density in slides because you can only do 1 point at a time. So it's like one slide equals 1 point, but make sure that every drop of ink on that slide is reinforcing the point, right? It's so easy to make ridiculously complicated infographics. Like, oh, I took a 6-dimensional concept and I squashed it down to 2 dimensions by altering the shape, right? So triangles, circles, and squares. I've got red, yellow, and blue. I've got size of the bullet. I've got the X and the Y axis. Like you could probably get. I remember doing this over dinner with some friends. We're trying to think of all the different ways you can get higher density data down to a single graphic, and you end up with this like completely unintelligible mess, right? Because like, what does the color mean again? What does the size mean again? What is it? What is it? Oh, now you're rotating the triangles. But it's like, okay, what's your point, right? Like, can you get it down to like one metric, one picture? Great. Use 2. Use annotations. Use the written word. Put a footnote. Oh, by the way, right? So like, this is the point. Like, get out of the chart junk and like vomiting things into your slides, and think about maps. So to fully close the loop on this like density. So Microsoft Word document, high density. You're going into PowerPoint. You're in this like tower structure, but think like a map. Maps don't work as a tower structure. You couldn't have like, okay, I'm looking at the map of Boston, and then I'm going to go slide down. Okay, now I'm looking at Chelsea, which is an adjacent city. Like you need to be able to see Boston and Chelsea next to each other. You can get to say, oh, that's how I drive there. It'd be such a pain in the neck to try to map a drive from New York to Boston where you're looking at each city vertically. Okay, here's New York to its outer bounds. I'm going to follow 95. Okay, next page. Okay, here's like the southern border of Connecticut. Where is 95 again? Oh, it's right there. Okay, now I can follow that to like Hartford. Okay, great. Now I can, right? But in a map, you just follow the line 95 New York to Boston. Your slides should be like maps. You can't get away from the tower, but you can make each stop in the tower, each floor of your tower, less claustrophobic. And Tufte has a great ways to explain this. Again, the ink is very expensive, so only put ink if it's relevant. He talks about colors. He uses actual like maps, the Swiss Alps. They've got very light blue, very light green. They're able to convey a lot about like the altitude or the height and stuff. Again, different shades of green, but everything kind of flows nicely. And you can like, he has like a video of he's just kind of like moving around the map, and he talks about all of the different things that they were able to accomplish with just very simple. It's a 2D space. It's a 3D map in 2D space. So they've sacrificed, but they've used color, but it's all desaturated. So your eye can tell the difference in green and blue. You don't have to have like this like hyper aggressive green, this hyper aggressive blue, which creates like discord in your like viewing system. But that's like the first thing. So we have to use PowerPoint. Try to use Word. See if you can get people comfortable with Word again. Like make Word great again. Sorry, it's a little extra political. We snuck some more.
Cut that out.
But like that's, and then okay, so you can't get there, or you might not be able to, but try. See if you can push a little bit of that, right? But then like the art of the long form email is completely forgotten. Everything's like, you give me a bullet. Even like I had a manager, put a TLDR at the top of all your emails. Right? It's like, okay, but like the long form email is important. Like being able to like, it's going to take you 10 minutes to read this, but you will know everything in 10 minutes. And you'll know infinitely more than if I tried to take that into like a 30 slide deck. But if you're stuck in the decks, think of maps. Your headline is a headline, not a chapter 1, section 2. It's a complete sentence. If you lost the whole slide, but you just had the headline, mission accomplished. If you have a graphic, make the graphic simple. Desaturate your color palette. Tell one thing with it. Make it humane. Horizontal comparisons are easy. Use the written word. Have some sentences. Don't be afraid of the sentences. Use tables. That's another one that he talks about. Everyone wants a picture. Hey, sometimes a table tells the story better than the picture. I just was talking to someone earlier today. I was like, maybe we should just throw a table in there. It's not as glamorous as charts, but it's going to make it easier to interpret. So I'll pause there, let you get in there. But this is where we're going on this one, right? Like, you can react, but like, Tufty's got so many thoughts about this, and this toolkit that we're going to start to build right now in real time, like these are the tactics to take ownership to get over the innumeracy hump. So that's my terrible introduction to Tufty. I could have done that so much better, I think, in hindsight.
No, I very much enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed it, and I have a bunch of thoughts and a question.
Yeah.
So the first thought is that, whenever we talk about storytelling and how to structure a narrative, well, the good narratives are very ergonomic. I think that I'm using in a sense that, okay, human beings are built in a certain way. So the easier it is for us to process that story, the better the structure of the story is. That's the metric of it, right? Because it's the human that sets the standard for it. And when you have anything visualized, because the written word is visualized. I mean, those are words. I mean, I'm now saying words. Well, can you see them? No. But when you write it down, now you can see them. So it is processed to the visual faculties. So you remember I sent you that course on copywriting. I'm sure you didn't have time to lean into it, but it's very interesting. Say it's about writing, but a huge part of it is the visual alignment of the words. So let's look at marketers, right? So let's look at marketers, and let's look at these very competitive environments of language. Look at your LinkedIn feed. So the most successful LinkedIn personalities all mastered good copywriting, and it's really about, like, first and foremost is what is the shape of your post. Like something trivial that no one would ever think of. Oh, what do you mean? That it should be like a long line and a shorter and a shorter and a shorter and a shorter, if it's possible, right? Obviously, it's marketing content, so you can kind of engineer that way. It's not necessarily immediately applicable in a business email that you're going to write. But let me give you an example. But if I'm using examples of, for example, one of our members being involved in a project, and I'm conveying that, I am assorting the bullet points in that visually pleasing way. I'm not using dense, long paragraphs. I break it up as much as possible. I sometimes even take liberties with, in traditional grammar, you might not want to actually use a full line break. I do, so I'm very liberal with that to kind of make it easier for the person to read it. That's the main thing. How can you make it easier for the person to process that information? And then we get into the territory again with the LinkedIn stuff. I don't know. I don't think they are as popular now, but for a while, you remember the carousels? Still are a bunch of them. The LinkedIn carousel. Now, that's basically like a PowerPoint mapped onto a social post that you can click through them. I think they kind of deprioritized it because actually people don't engage with it that much. The gold standard is either video or an image, a one-pager image. And on that one page, there's information visually, like images, tables, and then also written language. That seems to be the best. But even with those carousels, the best are the ones where the contrast between the color of the words and the background work nicely in an aesthetically pleasing way. So people would say, those carousels that don't really work, probably they don't convey the same quality of information. It has nothing to do with that.
No, that's right? Garish. A lot of them use like a really aggressive color because they think that's going to make it stand out in the feed, but all that does is make it unpleasant to look at. Because if you can, like, the holy grail is high contrast, low saturation.
Yeah.
Tufty, I think I'm pretty sure that's what Tufty says, right? Like the maps are perfect. You could Google Maps. You're not going to confuse the grass with the road with the water, but none of those colors hurt to look at. So when you have black font on a school bus yellow background, I just want to get off of that because it hurts my eyes to look at that.
Exactly. And so when you're conveying information, you might not think about this first, but that should be the the context in which you convey any kind of message. It's like, how can I make it pleasant and easy to process? Again, how you structure a narrative, a story, but then how you visualize it. It should be that ease and pleasantness. And then I have a question for you. So are you familiar with the Picha Kucha presentation style?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So again, there are different schools. And it's not like, one is the best. And I know that it can depend on what kind of message you're trying to convey in what kind of context. The Picha Kucha thing, whenever I saw it done well, it always does a fantastic job of getting the audience on a journey and actually succeeding in sustaining attention throughout. So the Picha Kucha, just so people who are not familiar, was actually introduced to me by one of our collaborators, Roberto Maranca, who is at Schneider Electric still. He used to be the chief data officer at Lloyds Bank, VP of data excellence at Schneider, and now I think he is in the chief data office somewhere. Anyways, with him, he introduced me to that idea. It's an Italian idea. Roberto is Italian, like Italian. It's like growing tomatoes in the backyard. Italian. And this actually goes back to, I don't think it's ancient Rome, it's medieval Rome, when they tried to convey messages to the populace, and the guy stood on a crate, someone was playing music, another person was holding up some simple images drawn, and then that person was basically telling these very, very short messages, one image, one message with some music. And that's how the populace actually paid attention.
That's the origin?
Yeah, I mean, don't quote me on it. I'm throwing 100% Roberto under the bus here if it's not true. But that's what I've heard. It might be one of those things. If it's not historically true, I think it's like metaphorically true. It's like fictionally true. That with this, it's like an old thing for sure, and it has to do with visual and short messages and with something else to kind of sustain the attention with the music. But this is the time and place to absolutely burst my bubble.
Chat GPT, dude.
Okay.
Your model's about to get updated.
I'm not ready. I'm entrenched.
It says Picha Kucha presentations originated in Tokyo, Japan in 2003. The architects Astrid Klein and Mark Ditham of Klein Ditham Architecture as a way to encourage concise and dynamic presentations. Picha Kucha means chit-chat. So it would be 20 slides, 20 seconds each. That gives you 6 minutes and 40 seconds to convey your information.
It's not even Italian. Okay, so it's Japanese.
That's the chat, but it could be hallucinating, right? Maybe it had some bad tomatoes, or right, but like
read together.
I thought that didn't sound right. That's why I was, because I remember learning about this in B school, and I actually use these to help my junior data scientists get comfortable presenting, because they don't get to do enough of that in school. So that's why I'm like such a huge fan of these as a format. But yeah, we're burning clock on something gratuitous. But yeah, man. So we've got
no, it's great. My model is 100% updated, and I think it in that situation I was spreading misinformation 100%. With Roberto, it might have been that I'm actually mistranslating what he said, because he might have said that, hey, there's this Picha Kucha thing. It's a fantastic Japanese tool, and you know what? In ancient Italy, I'm Italian. They use something similar. Convey messages. Now, the misinformation that I've been spreading since, shamelessly, is that it did originate there. But thank you for updating my model. And metaphorically, still, so it's something old. It's being used even before its official formulation of the Picha Kucha concept, even in ancient Rome, I guess. But my point is that we did use this a lot of times with presentations, and it's usually like a version of that when you do have a headline and it's not chapter 1, section B, but it's something that's evocative. Sometimes it's just intriguing. Sometimes it's very descriptive, but just usually one simple sentence and an image that relates to the message, usually evoking emotion. And then you tell your story, that short section of the story, why you're on that slide. I'm sure that we will get into other areas with Tufty, but what do you think about, Picha Kucha, this Japanese invention?
That the need to be it's not even like conciseness or concision. It's about clarity, and like that's Tufty. Tufty wants clarity in the world, right? Because like, even the great irony of my muddy, circuitous attempt to close that loop about density and tower, I probably should have separated the two concepts, but I let them blur together. I was unclear, and so then there was kind of a mishmash that someone listening to this is going to be like, does this guy really know Tufty? Like, I swear I do. It's just, articulating great ideas with a slow tongue. I am a mere mortal compared to Tufty. But no, like the clarity of the Pechakucha format, or like TED Talk, even a TED Talk, is such an important thing. And like, it starts with the headline. So, when you have an app, when you have an analysis, a report, your insights, whatever, and you're forced to convey it through PowerPoint, the best thing you can do is take the headlines, put them in an email, and see, if I sent you this email, is it coherent? Does it have a narrative? Does it convey the information? Sales were up in Q2 thanks to breakthrough in Florida market. That's your headline. Your graphic can be, here's all of the markets with maybe Florida's like year-over-year growth by market. And you can see Florida's taller than everybody else. Some details off to the right. And like, that's your slide. Okay, great. Here's how we're going to replicate the Florida success in Texas. Okay, so now I know you're going to take what you did in Florida, bring it to Texas. The body of the slide can explain the key things. Oh, we're going to market to Hispanic people, or we're going to do whatever. But like, the point is, like, okay, those two headlines together, Florida grew the most, and we have a plan to repeat that in Texas. Biggest headwind is whatever. I don't know enough about the two states to keep this going much longer. But like, the point is, like, you rip out your headlines, put them in a Word doc, put them in an email. Is it coherent? Could you send that to your mom and she understands what you do for a living? Right? The grandma test, right? If you sent this to your grandma, could she figure out? She might not know what ROIs and EBITDA and all that, but she found the narrative. That's a great test, because we can spend way too much time trying to get the perfect infographic, and we forgot, do we have a coherent narrative? That's why you talked about, like 2 episodes ago, the narrative structure, like the way of the world, the case for change, like all of those different things. I probably already got that wrong, but that's like so important for conveying something. Like, just have a narrative. And Pechakucha builds that muscle, and it might take you an hour to prep for a 6-minute Pechakucha drill, but you can, once you have the first one, then it becomes a couple of minutes to like tweak it, edit it until you have like a perfect Pechakucha. And they have like competitions and stuff too. So like, you could potentially, really work your craft. Or I tell a lot of people, hey, if you're like really uncomfortable talking in front of people, try Toastmasters. Now there's no slides, just let it fly. Get his microphone, let it rip. Right? We were doing a Toastmasters club at my last job. Shout outs to Travis. He got that off the ground. I thought he did a fantastic job with it. Right? It was like doing all these. I've
never done it, but I was always intrigued. Yeah.
So I mean, that ability to convey information orally is also important. People who all that kind of like filler noise is, I think, I want to say Tuffy talks about this. He might not, because he's the visual guy, but somebody pointed this out to me. I didn't come up with this myself, but when your mouth gets ahead of your brain, that's like the loading screen. Right? And so people who are really effective at public speaking, they have techniques to manage their breathing, manage their rhythm. They can control the pace so that they don't whatever. What's interesting about that, though, is people often pick up other filler words. So I'm not going to draw attention to mine, because then everybody will only hear that throughout the synthesis portions of this series. But
we'll cut them all out.
Why does he seem to be like the talking head guy from the 80s? If they keep chopping his filler word out, now that he told us what it is. But that almost tick is still your brain and your mouth trying to get back on the same page. So we're getting off the track, though, because we were talking about visual stuff. But before I do that, I mean, I close a loop. Like, I love Pechacucha. I think the clarity is so important. The narrative that you can string together in 6 minutes is so important. And a great way, actionable tactic when you're trying to cross that gap, when you're trying to solve for a numeracy, when you're taking ownership, is making sure that your presentations, because you're trapped in that medium, your headlines form a cohesive narrative when you strip them out of the PowerPoint deck.
So you're saying that Pichacuccia is the second best Italian invention since water ducts. I got you.
I don't recall saying that at all.
Okay. and just a final note on that, there's a new way of learning language, which is contextual, where you actually, let's say you want to learn German, and you read a paragraph. It's a very simple paragraph with simple words. Man went to the shop, met a girl, bought a beer. And you learn it by actually reading it in German. You don't speak any German. And let's say when it's beer, next to the German word beer, which is beer, B-I-E-R, but there's a little emoji of a beer. Or met the girl, next to the girl word, just probably I did learn some German.
Fraulein, Frau.
I think Frau, yeah. Maybe it's woman, but probably Frau. Okay.
I think Fraulein might be the petite form of it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm ashamed that you know it better than I do. I mean, I'm the Eastern Central European. And,
I attempted to learn German, and the second we got to advanced like grammar, like the verbs and stuff, I was like, okay,
it's rough.
I got bucked off the bull, man.
I know.
I was like, du bist willkommen. I got this. I was like, der Kartoffel ist ruined. I was like, I got this. And then they're like, they hit me with a tapeworm word. I was like, okay, I'm out. Sorry, guys.
Yeah,
like,
you're done.
I tried.
No, I feel you. I did get conversational, like barely at my peak, but then it was a free fall after. But my point is that next to each word, there's like an emoji. It's conveying what the concept is visually.
That's so cool.
Yeah, apparently, as you go through the program and they increase the difficulty of the text, but you just get used to just assuming, and apparently you get conversational very quick. So, just like kind of connected to that.
Yeah. I'll go give French another try so I can.
I did have to study French as well, and in the army, because in NATO, officially, if you start speaking in French, every fellow officer is supposed to understand you. Like, they have the right, because when it was founded, the French only joined with that caveat that, okay, but the official language is both English and French.
Nice.
Don't fact check me on anything from now on. Right?
Is French the second official language of NATO?
I have PTSD.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was. I mean, they are and have been consistently a global power. So
I'm pretty confident about this piece of information. Definitely more confident than I was about Pichacuccia.
The Italian origin of the. Imagine being in the Colosseum with like tigers and gladiators, and like, okay, now we're gonna get to the guy doing a slide presentation. Like, that's a contrast.
PowerPoint, the origins of PowerPoint.
Origin of PowerPoint. All right, so moving back to Tufte, moving into graphics, right? So we got a headline. We got our beautiful headline. And one of the things that you talked about that I didn't jump on because I don't want to break up your flow. You talked about how the bullets get shorter as you move down. So that is the golden triangle or the golden F. And I came to this through eye tracking studies because I was designing a web-based application. And then I learned about that and I brought it into my PowerPoint stuff. So essentially, for Westerners, because we read top down, left, right, we place on any field of information, the top left quadrant gets the most importance. Top right, bottom left are roughly equal, mid importance. Bottom right corner is more or less ignored. That's the crux, like, okay, I can ignore that without consequence. Now, this doesn't mean that when you read an email that even if it's only 4 sentences, that you're not going to pay attention. It's just in a visual, when you start to spread out your information and you create the map, or you look at your slide. Now your slide is a map, right? And you have every drop of ink is conveying information. There is still a fundamental human habit to ignore the bottom right corner and to place chief prominence at the top left. So what's the top left? Well, that's your headline, really. And that's why, now here's a debate about layouts, but that's also why your copy gets narrower as you go down. Because if you've made it this far down, your attention span to keep going to the right has diminished significantly. So if I have a more verbose sentence, it's got to be at the top, and I've got to skinny them down as we go down. Right? That's why the call to action is like, click now. It's like as concise as it gets, like, click with an exclamation point. Like, that's it. Like, because your willingness to keep going from left to right is exhausted. Right?
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So, or an arrow just. So here's the debate. And I recall, so my prior boss, very, very strong opinions on style. So he and I used to butt heads over this one. And I think we just had like a very polite professional disagreement about what to do. So the triangle principle, as you move down, your more important stuff needs to go to the left because the willingness to go to the right diminishes. So if you've got a picture, an infographic, and you've got written words to explain it, how should they be oriented? Should you go pick on the left, words on the right? Or should you go words on the left, pick on the right?
I think the latter.
The latter. Now, what makes you say the latter? Because we're about to disagree, by the way. Spoiler alert.
Okay. And I don't have a strong opinion. I'm very, very open for my model to be updated.
It's not even. There's no model to update. This is pure opinion. I don't think there is like a scientific. I would love.
There's no consensus.
I would love if there's a scientific way that we can get to an answer. And if it means that Peter's right and I'm wrong, I'll send them a basket of fruit or something like that with a my bad, dude. Sorry, I was such a jerk. Like I will.
Peter and I are grouping up on you right now.
Yes, I will do my penance if it turns out Peter was right the whole time. But as far as I can find, it's a matter of opinion. So you're saying on a slide, picture on the right, words on the left.
Because it's just more, I have more mental capacity to focus on whatever's on the left, and I guess it's more difficult to read than to look at an image. That would be my
okay.
gut feel. I don't know.
Okay. I get that, and that's I think the argument is that if I know that your proclivity is to not look to the right, put the cool thing to the right.
Yeah.
Right? Give you a carrot to follow. Okay. Now here's where my counter perspective comes in. The graphic should be the most important thing on the page. Second, maybe to the headline. So put it on the left-hand side. Right? Because the only reason you're going to look at the words is if the graphic is not fully self-explanatory. So why create a detour with a carrot? It's a beautiful carrot, big fat juicy carrot. You can't wait to eat it, right? But it's like, why? Headline, picture, next slide, please. That's the basis of my opinion. You only
That's interesting.
Explanation if you're insufficiently clear with your picture. So make a better picture. Don't put it on the right as a reward for slogging through the words.
For a second there, I thought that the title of your memoir will be "Peter was right all along," but I think
Peter had it. Yeah, that's the title.
But probably not, because now that you now that you say this, so that's a good point. Of the most important thing should be the graphic. Plus, the graphic should be an eye candy. In some way, shape, or form, it should be easy to process. It will attract attention. And I think because of this Westerner left to right tendency too, I'm just gonna skip to the image. I don't want to go back anymore. I'm not gonna shift back to do the more difficult thing now, right? Of reading, and also I'm done. Like I've done my brain done the thing. It just goes left to right. It's work done, right?
Right.
So I think you won me over there. You ran a very effective learning sequence, and it was successful.
And again, to be clear, in case I ever have to work for Peter again, like this is a matter of opinion. Discussing some opinion.
Yeah, but we're friends here.
I have the utmost respect for the man. This is a fun example of like there is no like textbook scientific answer. I think both of them can be justified, but this is where you find your style. So my style is, if I know you like to stay on the left-hand side of the page, I'm going to put the stuff I want to make sure you look at on the left, and my bias is I want you to look at the graphic more than I want you to read the words. And I think maybe his is I want you to read the words more than I need you to read the graphic. So
I think it's also counterintuitive because so what did he say when you presented your argument? Because I think if his goal is for people to read the words, okay, that's a fair goal. Maybe it's just his style of conveying things in a written word. They need to be read, but then doesn't this defeat the purpose? Because again, people will jump to the image. It will attract the eyes. Once you're there, you're not going to go back, right? So in order to get people to read the words, it wouldn't make sense to kind of lure them in with the image, and then the natural movement left to right will lead them to the text.
So it's been a while since he and I had that discussion. My hypothesis, so if I'm misrepresenting his deepest belief, then I apologize. I think it was a hedge against the graphic not getting there.
Not getting there
not doing the job. Like you got like in my opinion, I'm like I'd rather spend more time building a better infographic than crafting better bullets. And I think my hypothesis is that he says, well, the graphic will stop at a certain point. You can only make the graphic so good, and then you need information. Then you need to rely on the written word. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, like a damn good infographic, I'm very passionate about this part of data science, is like good infographic, like good conveyance of information. Like I'd rather, it's kind of like if you ask me to chop down a tree in an hour, I'm going to spend 45 minutes on the axe. I'd rather spend the 45 minutes on the graphic rather than wordsmithing bullets, because there's infinite degrees of freedom with the bullets. You actually have a lot fewer degrees of freedom with a graphic. Like, I want to convey that this thing is bigger than that thing. Okay, well, the human eye can very easily interpret bar 1 bigger than bar 2. And I can annotate it with an aggressive shade of red. I usually like that crimson color in the default Microsoft palette. So I might have very pale bars that stand out. They have contrast, and then bang, something red. You can't miss. Like, red is such a powerful color to draw the eye. That's why I use sparingly. It's the strongest color in the repertoire.
Yeah.
Right? But I will pull you right there. I say, look, this is 25% bigger than this. I just did that with my project I'm doing on a pricing project. I have a red box. We're a turquoise company, so I have these turquoise bars, right? And that red box, bang, you can't miss it. This one's 80% bigger than that one. It's kind of weird. I want to talk about that, right? So it's unambiguous. I don't need bullets if I can, like the picture tells you, and I'm going to have a voiceover. I'm there with you. We're here together talking, right? So that's, I think I think that's the root of the difference of opinion. I think you could build the best graphic possible. I think he's like, well, no, the graphic's only going to get so good. Let's craft bullets. I think that's, and he might be like, no, you're an idiot. It's the carrot, and I want them to come across the bullets to get the carrot. Or maybe it's some third reason that I can't even speculate. But that's my hypothesis, is that there's limitations to the quality of a graphic.
We'll get Peter on a special episode so he can plead his case.
I mean, he's a fantastic dude. You should, great. You'd be a great addition to most networks.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Probably we won't be able to fit it into this conversation because we have like 14 minutes left. But you know what? In the synthesis, we could think about, because that's a huge topic, actually, even for me personally, of how to build a good infographic and do it in a time efficient way. What is the 80-20 of building infographics? And infographics might be also the 80-20 of some of this whole visual representation thing in that business data science setting, or get close to that, right?
We got a whole playbook that we can just lift and shift, just take off the branding from the prior company, and we're off to the races. We'll put some ABCDS branding on it, and we're good to go. Amazing.
We're going to cross out the previous one.
Yes.
Just put ABCDS. Okay, now,
yes.
Because definitely that's something I know that's huge, and would be such a powerful tool for people to be able to deploy.
Yeah, and let's talk real quickly a little bit more on visuals, because there's some really low hanging fruit here. So like the saturation, right? So like your logo, those are high saturation colors. Those blues are aggressively blue. They are not pale blue by any stretch of the imagination. Now, blue is not that unpleasant to look at, so you can get away with it. But if you were red, that would be a little bit tougher. If you were yellow, that's tough to look at, right? But saturation and desaturating your palettes where you can allows for contrast without displeasure or unpleasantness. Now, there's a limit to that. And again, I have the slides that we'll share when we go to post-production. Right now, we're just kind of two dudes riffing. But if you need more than, say, 4 colors, low contrast starts to suffer, because it's difficult to tell the difference between a pale purple and like a pale pink. It's difficult to tell the difference between a pale purple and a pale blue, because it's a secondary color that is comprised of red and blue, right? So as you desaturate, some colors do start to converge. But if you're only doing like 3 colors and you've got a gray, a red, and a blue, you're never going to confuse the 3 in any sort of pairwise comparison. Now, if you take those same things and you crank up the intensity, so now it's like black, red, fire truck red, and let's say royal blue. Those are completely and royal purple, so not purple, and get a nice aggressive purple in there too. Those are all 4 of those. There is 0.0% chance you're going to mix any of them up. But if you really look at that, that is unpleasant to look at. The colors are so angry and loud and saturated. So that's why with desaturation, you can put them next to each other in the same visual plane, and the eyeball is okay. This is such an important thing to think about when you are you going to project it through the internet using like a WebEx or a Zoom? Are you going to project it on an overhead projector onto a whiteboard? Are you going to print it and hand it out? Because there are slides on your desk through Zoom, you might have the contrast preserved, a light gray and a light purple. And this happened to me at Aetna, right? Purple was the color, so I used gray as the knot and the purple as the focus. But then on an overhead projector, they were completely washed out. So I needed to go more saturated because of that. So if you're going to present like at a conference, be careful with your contrast levels or your saturation levels, because you might get washed out. And then when you're printing, you should always test print, because what you see on the screen and what you get from your HP 9000 doesn't always necessarily correspond either. But generally speaking, go with the least saturation possible. And then the last point on color, because I know we're going to wrap up, is think about how the saturation, again, this happens the most with high saturation colors. If you have bars, for example, so you have a red bar, very red bar, and you're going to have a white space, and then you're going to have a red bar, and then you're going to have a white space, and then you're going to have a red bar, right? Your eyeball, it's not going to be like this, where it's like super obvious, but it vibrates when it looks at something like that, occipital vibration. That is another form of unpleasantness that you get from looking at a bad infographic. But it also makes it harder to tell, things start to blur. Your eye starts to compensate for this unpleasantness. You start to get like blurring and smearing, and you lose the ability to see things that might be in a fine detail. So when you desaturate, the white is not so contrasted to your bars. You turn down significantly occipital vibration, which helps you to focus on the graphic. So that's color and saturation. I don't know if you have any thoughts on color. There's like 2 more must say things about Tufty, and then we can like wrap up. But I don't want to rush you. So like, what do you obviously picked your graphics, or you hired someone to do your logo. I know I've been picking on contrast. You also have that white line right down the middle, which does potentially create some occipital vibration. So what are your thoughts on color? How do you think about color?
Yeah, so color, it's interesting that I did immediately look at the psychology of color in terms of what colors evoke what kind of emotion, risk, or what kind of assumption. So, for example, for us, because it's data storytelling, and what we're doing is, we're introducing something sometimes unexpected. It's a little bit out there compared to what's usually being the common octave of how providers operate in the space. The classic tech provider and a corporate. So for me, because we're a little bit out there to begin with, it was very important to reassure people and generate trust. And blue is the pathway to do that, right? There's nothing does it better than blue. Right. So that's why it was blue. I like red in general because it is, again, it can be a little bit edgy. It evokes attention, but it's too much. And it boils it over. There are red logos, everything like Coca-Cola.
CVS.
But
one.
CVS,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah, but for us, I kind of just landed on blue. And funny story that we tried to get a logo designed, and many iterations. I didn't like any of them, so I ended up actually drawing this on a piece of paper.
Nice.
And I took a photo because I was like, no, the two hemispheres of the brain. There's the left hand side, logical. We can kind of paint a picture about that with the dots and the lights, and then there's the right hemisphere, which is the more human relationships, imagination, and let's just make it look like a brain. An actual brain. And there were a few iterations. That's how it came to be, right? Okay. And with regards to the saturation too, so we mentioned something important that, when you're printing something, it's important to know what comes with the territory in that case. Might also make a point there that it's actually much more pleasant to read something when it's physical. So even the best visual experiences that are digital, the best. If you think about a Kindle, or you think about some of these digital notepads, they get really good, but nothing gets as pleasant as a physical piece of paper that you can actually read. So something to note there, right? You can have the best screen. Apple is great at producing the best screens on the MacBook and the iPhone. Still, it's not as pleasant as if you have something a brick and mortar. So those are just my quick thoughts around color and saturation.
That's a good, and I agree with everything, especially with the psychology of color, which is it's such an interesting domain. So when I did entry level Escape, I actually got I was just Googling for palettes that are aesthetically pleasing. That's how I got the lime green, the light blue, the gray. But then the book cover is dark green. That one's just because I like the color. That was literally it's my book, it's my cover. I'm doing dark green. I'm going for it, bro. That was purely just I want a book that I'm happy to look I find aesthetically pleasing, so I went with dark green. But that is
it is pleasant to hold. It is pleasant to hold.
I mean,
actually, might have it somewhere here. Actually, I think it's actually.
Look, my drink glass is dark green too. I really like dark green. I have a bunch of dark green shirts and stuff like that. But I don't know what dark green symbolizes. I forgot what it symbolizes, but I do just find it very aesthetically pleasing.
The psychology of green branding is the lighter side of the color indicates freshness and growth, while the darker shades of the color relate to prestige and wealth, which is perfect for entry-level Escape.
Yeah, okay, so it fits.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, nice. Okay, that works. So to wrap us up, and I'm going to throw one more tough deism into the wrap up. So stay tuned. It's gonna get you by surprise. So I gotta be careful saying a significant problem or challenge, the wall that we need to overcome in data storytelling is innumeracy. Level 1 innumeracy, people just don't know how numbers work. Level 2 innumeracy, people don't contextualize or understand the story. Data scientists, by their nature, are going to be amazing at level 1. Numeracy, don't have to worry about it. Right? I know how to do all kinds of stuff with numbers. Most of our fellow travelers do. Level 2 is where you can get in trouble. And the canonical example is, hey, who's our best customer? You better define best before you touch a single line of code, or you're going to be in for a world of hurt with innumeracy. So that's the wall. That's the wall you got to get over. Okay, great. So either we can go to the default mode and blame people for not being as smart as we are, or we can crack open our friend Jocko's book, and now we're doing ownership. How can I convey the information? What am I not doing or doing that is creating the action gap? which may just be an outcropping of innumeracy. There's other potential blockers like operational barriers or other things, or competing incentive structures, but we're going to go after innumeracy as the biggest one because that's so idiosyncratic to what we do. Okay, how can I better convey that then? It's my fault. Okay, well, if you want to convey better, crack open your Tufty. And we talked about you got to have the narrative structure. We know this, right? Data storytellers, we're already sold. Ideally, you'd be in the written word. You can't be more narrative than a written word, but that's not the currency that we trade in. We're stuck in PowerPoint. So stop thinking about towers. Start thinking about maps, right? I can't map the course from New York to Boston on slides. I have to have a big map that allows me to follow Route 95. Other key Tufty concepts. Ink is expensive, so don't put crap on your slides that doesn't help convey anything. Headline, picture, something to go with the picture, maybe some footnotes, caveats, right? Everything needs to serve a purpose. Your chart, no chart junk. Make a better infographic, okay? Desaturate your color palette. Look at a map, Google Maps. Those are soft colors. They are not aggressive, but you will never confuse the road from the grass from the water, right? They use saturation very deliberately. Be careful with how you space and arrange things because occipital vibration. Avoid things that create unpleasantness in the eyes of the viewer. And then finally, the final Tuftyism before we move into synthesis next time is that pie charts are trash and you should never use them. They are spatially inefficient, and the human eye is awful at making small judgments of angle. So yes, if you have like 25% versus 75%, sure, but why didn't you use a bar? So the last Tuftyism is pie charts are trash. Never use them. And we'll talk more about Tufty and synthesis because we're going to talk about how to actually make the slides, how to make the graphics. But Tufty's got the key to help you take ownership to overcome innumeracy. And that's our grab bag episode.
Well, amen to that. And it's very interesting that you, as you were talking, I see this thread emerging with purposeful communication, because whenever you look at, for example, Voss, it's about ask the right questions. Don't, like, when you ask a question, make sure that it's purposeful. It serves the purpose, right? Or when you pitch a story, make sure that every piece of the story serves the purpose of bringing the audience along in the narrative. In this case too, when you're presenting something, make sure that everything serves a purpose. And that's why you just can't do anything without understanding best practice. So even our synthesis will be about that, crystallizing the best practice, make sure that your communication will become purposeful and effective. Right. So, sir, I always very much enjoy our talks.
Likewise.
This was fantastic. And until next time.
All right, sir. Take care.